All right, well, thank you for the sellout crowd for coming along. Yeah, so Africa, so I'll speak to you about Africa. I assume most of you never heard of who I am, so I'm Nye Davis. I've travelled last year to UK to Cape Town. I've done a bit of travelling previously. I'm now on 50 countries on 2 wheels. Yeah, so I have this philosophy of travelling down the world in stages. So like most people here, I have a job, I have a mortgage now, so I can't take 2 years out of my life to go and jet off around the world for 2 years. So I've gone UK to Azerbaijan, and last year I did UK to Cape Town. The idea of going to Cape Town, it came out of the blue. Originally I wanted to ride to Magadan in Russia, but obvious political circumstances changed that. And I looked on a map and I looked where else would be exciting, and Africa kind of came up as the obvious one. I grew up watching Indiana Jones and that sort of thing, and it really inspired the trip. I only had 3 months, so it was basically go when I could. So I set off last summer here, which, as it turned out, was awful timing. So I hit West Africa in rain season and basically just got flooded out until I got to Cameroon, effectively. I'm going to skip through some pictures. So this is in Turkey, this is on a previous trip. Greece, I presume. This is my first foray into Africa back in 2018, I believe, so that's on my Tiger 800. So for the Africa trip, I chose a much lighter bike, so I went on a WR250R. Oh, there's Donkey, no longer with me, although sold to another adventurer. So, as I say, set off last year, kind of jetted through Europe pretty quickly to get into the adventure, to get into Morocco. Headed through Morocco pretty quickly, through the Atlas Mountains, and then here we are in the Sahara. And going to the Sahara for the first time was a real special experience, because in Europe we just don't have landscapes like that where everything's busy, there's people everywhere, there's buildings no matter where you go, there's scenery all around you, whereas the Sahara was just this total antithesis of that. It was just nothingness. We have a nice dead camel. Yeah, we'll brush past the dead camel. So this was in Mauritania, and that was the kind of first country in real Africa, if you like. Morocco, it feels quite westernized, it feels much like Europe nowadays. And getting to Mauritania for the first time was this real kind of culture shock. So I met this guy who is, I can't remember, to be honest, where he's from. Was he Argentinian? Yeah. No, he's Brazilian. He's got a Brazilian flag. So yeah, this chap was actually walking the length of Africa, and if you ever want to feel inadequate as an overlander, talk to cyclists, and then if you want to feel especially inadequate, talk to a guy that's walking the length of the continent with a glorified pushchair, and that's what he was doing. So he's my absolute hero. So he should probably be on this stage, not me. Anyway, moving forward, so this was coming into Senegal, and again, Senegal was a real culture shock, because up until that point I hadn't had to deal with corruption. All the officials that I'd met had been totally civil, and then I kind of came into a little bit green and immediately got stung for a pretty hefty bribe by a not so pleasant police officer. But very quickly I kind of became aware of the African way, and how to barter properly, and when you get stung with a £500 bribe, how to get that down to a couple of polo mints. Moving forward, here we can see the extent of the rain and the mud. So this was in Guinea, and as soon as I got into Guinea, it was just like I was confronted by this waterfall of rain, basically. So, as you would imagine, West African roads are not the best. They're not quite to a German standard, and yeah, those dirt roads very quickly became mud baths. So little Donkey got a bit of a makeover and was brown for quite a while. But one thing that really stuck out, especially in Guinea, where there's not a great deal of wealth, there's not a great deal of anything, to be honest, but the people were just incredibly hospitable. So these are some chaps that I met at the airport, actually, who I went to the airport because when I entered Guinea, I was told that I had to go to the Ministry of Secrets, or some Harry Potter sounding name anyway, to get my visa stamp, because they refused to do it at the border. So I headed off there, and they told me they wouldn't do it unless I gave them an exorbitant fee. So I told them to piss off, effectively, and I went to the airport, and then these guys just ended up being my best mates for the day, effectively. This chap on the left is an American guy who does business in the area. He ended up being incredibly useful because when I got stopped later on in Guinea, again by a not so pleasant police officer, I called him up and he very kindly pretended to be an official from the British Embassy to very quickly tell the police officer to let me get on my way and stop interrupting tourism in the country. So that worked well for me. Moving on. Here we have a scene in Guinea. That kind of sums up Guinea. Go back, what are you doing? That kind of sums up Guinea perfectly. Is some beautiful mountains, beautiful scenery, a hell of a lot of nature, and a hell of a lot of mud. Go forwards. Yeah, go for it. So this was in Nigeria. Nigeria was a country that was quite intimidating to me. It's got a bit of a nasty reputation amongst travellers. If you look on iOverlander, you'll see lots of reports of dodgy police and AK-47s, as we can see there. And yeah, generally not always the nicest welcome, but actually what I experienced in Nigeria was the polar opposite of that. The police were just incredibly kind, and whilst you do get stopped every 5 minutes, they always just want to be your best mate. And what I quickly learned was that if you want to get the police on your side, talk about football. And although I kind of grew up around here, I know nothing about football. But when they say, where you're from, I say, oh, I'm from Manchester. And then immediately their faces light up and they go, Manchester United, or Manchester City. And I say, I should know more, but I know literally nothing. And no matter where you go in Africa, seemingly everybody has an encyclopedic knowledge of Manchester United history. And we'll go into the subtlest details about Alex Ferguson's career and how it was the worst thing ever when he left. So if you nod and agree and smile, he'll be your best mate and you'll get straight through. You could be in the middle of sort of bumfuck nowhere, sorry for the language, and they could have no running water, no electricity, but they will know everything about football. So if anyone is travelling through the region, bear that in mind. This kind of summarises the weather that I had in Nigeria. So it was wet, in a word. It really put a dampener on the experience of West Africa because it's a beautiful place. And there's a hell of a lot of culture and a hell of a lot to explore that isn't particularly well documented by travellers. But because it was like this for several thousand miles, it was kind of a case of suck up and get through it. So I had flooding and flooding and flooding, and what you'll see next was a result of that flooding. So my bike actually ran like a dream the whole way. It never broke down. So kudos to Yamaha. But the one thing that I did deal with was quite a lot of water making its way into the engine, and there is the result of that. But again, all fixable, no major dramas, nothing that couldn't be fixed in a hotel car park. There's some more friendly police chaps brandishing their weapons. Okay, so this is moving forward. This is where the trip really changed. Moving through West Africa, it was basically just riding through a continuous puddle. And then as I got over the border into Cameroon, and then moving south, kind of heading into Gabon, which you can no longer go to, unfortunately, which is a bit of a theme of my trip, with that sort of coups seem to follow every country that I went through.
What did you do?
What did I do?
To create the coups?
I don't know, to be honest. So I was in Senegal, and then the week after I left, the military shut down the roads and shut down the internet. So I was sort of fortuitous timing, really. And then where was the next one? Côte d'Ivoire? Côte d'Ivoire. They were trying to overthrow one of the local obas in the region, which I kind of caught the beginning of the riots, but again, so I charmed my way through, I presume. And then Gabon was the big one, really. So I had a fantastic experience in Gabon. It was one of the most beautiful countries in Africa that I went through, and literally you'll be riding through rainforests the entirety of the time there, so you get hundreds and hundreds of miles. And you'll see nothing but trees and monkeys, and I was incredibly fortunate to see a gorilla early in the morning, which people pay a hell of a lot of money to do, but I found one whilst I was eating my cereal, which was not a bad deal, really. But yeah, the weather changed as soon as I crossed the equator, and I entered dry season, and it opened up this wealth of exploration that you could see, and suddenly you could talk to everybody because everybody wasn't hiding from the weather. And that was my memory of Central Africa, was that it was beautiful, it was dry, it was rich with wildlife, it was rich with people, whereas you kind of missed that a little bit in West Africa. But that's my awful planning, to be honest. This is
You went in the rainy season.
Yes.
That was,
so if you read online, everyone will say set off in November, but partially down to stubbornness and partially down to a very limited time budget, I set off in June or July, which is the most awful time to go because it was about 52 degrees in Mauritania, it was blisteringly hot, and then it was just constant rain in West Africa. But it was good going south, going down sort of the equator. So this is a kind of typical Congolese road. The bike kind of got this new red look after not very long, but again, Congo was just an incredible country with beautiful people, and it really changed my perception of being a kind of privileged Westerner, experienced the poverty that Africa entails, but seeing how everyone dealt with it, it just totally changed my mind about any sort of issues that I had back home are so insignificant. We should, at some point, have a photo of an actual human being and not just my bike. There's some Angolan children. This is what I'm talking about, football. So these lovely individuals had never heard of the UK, never heard of England, but what they had heard of was Manchester United. So I just stopped in some Angolan village to enjoy a Coke and some chocolate. And these little fellas pop their heads up. They see the little kind of village that they lived in just at the other side of the lake. They popped their heads up and they were pretty nervous to come and speak to me. And I mean, I don't speak any Portuguese, so it was entirely a Google Translate job. But we kind of quickly became friends after giving them copious amounts of chocolate as a bribe. Skip. So this is in Angola. Again, a bit of a theme with African countries is that there's this legacy of war throughout. So this is sort of a remnant of the Angolan Civil War, which if you are a history nerd like myself, you will know all about. Skip. And then this is where the trip really took a different turn. So before I went to Africa, I had this real romanticised notion that it was going to be wildlife everywhere and beautiful open vistas and not very many people. And that's kind of why I wanted to go to Russia in the first place, is because I wanted isolation. I didn't get that in Africa. It turns out it's absolutely bustling with people. But entering Namibia, it was a total change. So suddenly it was wide open spaces and, well, incredible wildlife like this. So you'd be riding along and you'd have giraffe for company rather than thousands of tuk-tuks and terrible taxi drivers. So this is in the Etosha National Park in the north. But what I did find with Namibia, if anybody is considering going, is that it was actually a little bit uninteresting. It was a little bit Euro-sized, if that's a word, probably not. Out of the blue, I got a message from a chap in Botswana, a South African guy who lived in a town called Maun. He sent me a message and said, "Oh, come and stay with me in Bots, and I'll sort of show you a good time," which sounds dubious thinking about it now, but no sort of anal exploration happened. Don't worry. Sorry, Jade.
You haven't got pictures of that, have you?
None that I can share here. They're on the OnlyFans. I didn't really know what to expect. I thought I was going to be there for one night, and I turned up at this farm. Out popped Clint, and Clint was an avid adventure motorcyclist but didn't have any other adventure motorcyclists to ride with. And he had this idea for this big loop that went up into the Chobe National Park, looped round and then crossed the Mahadi. But it wasn't the sort of route to do on your own because it was about 1,000 kilometres of dirt basically and no roads in between. So we recce'd the route in his Land Cruiser and we left fuel at periodic points every sort of 150 miles. We buried fuel in the sand, and then the next day we set off. And Botswana for me, it wasn't even a trip that was on my itinerary, and it ended up being the absolute highlight of Africa. It had the ruggedness that you experienced to the north, then you had the beauty that you had in Namibia, and you had just utterly stunning wildlife. And seeing elephants in Botswana is like seeing sheep in Wales. They are just fucking everywhere. So this is a typical Botswanan campground. This is in a place called Elephant Sands. They're not bad neighbours to sleep next to. A little bit noisy in the morning though, and you don't want them falling on you drunk. So this is with Clint, and this is heading across the Mahadi, across the salt pans. So again, for all you geologists, the Mahadi is essentially just a huge, big open expanse of nothingness. Was formerly a lake bed, and in the middle of it is this little island called Kubu Island, and that was our destination, that was our target after 2 days of riding. And that's where we camped for the night. At a sort of million-star hotel, pitched the tents up on the sand, and had no one around for a few hundred miles for company, and that was that really. There is little old me, there is Clint's belly with some Pringles, only the best provisions. We were riding along, we're headed up into the Chobe, through the fence, and immediately there's just wildlife everywhere. So we set off really early in the morning because the sand is a little bit firmer, so it's easier to kind of get on top of the sand and maintain some speed rather than just fall off, because I'm quite a terrible rider. We set off really early, and if you kind of hit it at the right time, you'd see lion coming out of the bush, you'd see wild elephants along the trail. And this was a cut line that we basically followed, so we headed up north, jumped onto this, and then followed this cut line for about 200 miles to meet the tarmac at the other end of it. Didn't see a single person, just lots of suicidal gazelles basically jumping in front of you, who I presume have never seen motorcycles before. And then there's the bikes sat proudly on Kubu Island, having completed their adventure without any breakdowns. And there we go, South Africa, last country of the trip. South Africa was a little bit anticlimactic actually, but we'll get onto that. In itself is a beautiful country, weirdly like Scotland in many ways, although quite a lot warmer, I should add. But my time in South Africa was quite brief because I was excited to get to Cape Town because I'd hoped to have a bit of a blowout basically, I'd hoped to get pissed. I had managed somehow to travel through Africa without getting the runs once, which was a fair old achievement. I took malaria pills, I was a good boy. I got to Cape Town, was there for about 2 days, and then spent the next 10 days shitting myself every day in bed, basically. So that was a pretty poor end to the trip. I booked to go shark diving actually, and the morning that I woke up to go shark diving, I woke up in a pile of my own poo. I still went, I should add, because how often you get to go shark diving, but I did throw up quite a lot towards the sharks and towards other people on the boat, so that kind of put a dampener on that experience too, but nonetheless I did go and swim with sharks. So that was the conclusion of the trip basically, so it was about 3 months and 20,000 kilometres. There's little old me at the end of Africa, having completed a trip and realised a dream, if you want to get all sentimental. But that's not the end really. So as I kind of brushed upon at the start of the trip, I had this idea of travelling around the world in stages. Sadly, I don't get paid to ride motorcycles, and I definitely don't get.
Yes, you do.
Well, not really. And I definitely don't get paid to go on big adventures. So going on these trips is freaking expensive and takes a hell of a lot of commitment, both in terms of time, logistics, and of course money. But there will be more in the future. Probably Russia, more than likely. That was the original aim, to kind of recreate the long way round trip. But yeah, so hopefully I'll be back in about 10 years with stories of Russia. And that's kind of it really, that's me.